why it is that American Indians chose to serve in the U.S. forces from the Indian Wars on up through today. It's something that not everyone is entirely clear about. I'm not sure that every Indian service member is entirely clear about it either. But importantly for me as a Cherokee citizen, when I first learned about one of the guys that I'm working on, Jack Montgomery, I just remember being really annoyed that I'd never heard of him before. I was probably in my 40s by the time that I started paying attention to his story in particular. I guess I had heard of him, but it just never really sank in. And so it occurred to me that there are a lot of Cherokee and other Native folks out there who would benefit by having heard of these men and the things that they got up to. And so I'd like to make their underrepresentation slightly less, right? We'll try to get them a little bit more into the spotlight. Thematically, too, part of what has always intrigued me, I suppose, about this film and the way that I approached it was through a spirit of exploration. So, a great deal of U.S. federal Indian policy is taken up with the time that we refer to as the reservation era, which was from the late 19th century on up to the earliest years of the 20th century, when native movements were severely restricted, right, kept in reserve, and natives were officially prohibited from going off reservation. And so for a number of years after the reservation era, it's my worry that some Native people have kind of made a virtue of necessity. And so they don't roam the way that they used to. We don't get out and move around and see as much of the world as we used to. And so I'd like to try to re-inspire some of our Native youth to take up that spirit of exploration. And I think that's modeled by these men in the 45th. So that speaks too to mobility. More broadly speaking, and this is maybe something that doesn't matter to anyone besides me. But in talking about what motivated and what help explains and what is represented in Native military service, I think of the idea of political forgiveness as thematically and critically relevant and underexplored. So, we think about political forgiveness on a much broader stage, how it is that, for instance, the leaders of South Africa might have forgive the apartheid rulers that came before them. We don't have much to say about how it is that American Indian individuals, people, stand in relationship to a broader nation that has offered them some serious historical wrongs. But I think what is represented there finally is a spirit of political forgiveness, not least because some of the people that they wind up needing to forgive for historical wrongs are their own family members. Especially in Oklahoma, Native people have been marrying non-Native people for a very long time. And you can't harbor a grudge against your own folks interminably without doing yourselves some harm. So I've got a thematic bibliography. I will not read through that, but if you're looking for the sorts of background materials on American Indians serving in the military, this is a reasonable start. Thematically speaking, this book on American Indians in World War I think, is among the best here by Thomas Britton. Some of these are a little bit hit or miss. Some of them are brilliant. Some of them are, like Paul Roger's, are fantastic history, but it's pretty narrowly focused in just one chapter on World War II. But these others, Townsend's is great. This is Weaver's is a more thematic approach, very broadly speaking. So this is again a little bit academic, and I don't want to burden you, but it's been my experience that most people talking about Native service in World War II have been preoccupied with what motivated them to join up. And there's been a lot of good history on that. Some of the leading causes have to do with economic necessity. We're talking people just coming out of the Great Depression in a area in Oklahoma that is not, the biggest money does not flow through here, right? So People needed jobs and they needed income. They got interested finally, I think, in starting to explore the world. They were starting to move around a bit and move away from an agrarian economy. There were some serious patriots among these native soldiers, too. And that's one thing that we'll hear them say over and over again in their own accounts of why they joined up. Sometimes you'll hear some historians and theorists argue about warrior traditions among American Indian people, and that undoubtedly motivated several, but I think that's potentially a stereotypical approach that we want to be a little bit cautious about, not least because Southeastern tribes didn't have the same kinds of warrior traditions that the Plains tribes over on the west side of the state had. The Southeastern tribes now live in the eastern side of Oklahoma. And for them, by and large, there are folk who are, in terms of values, kind of devoted to harmony and to, communities getting along together. They were not interested in raiding as a way of life, as were many of the Plains folks during the 19th century. So we want to draw some distinctions there. These intertribal differences matter a great deal. So for my film, I'm interested more in what is represented rather by Native military service rather than what motivates it. Um, this speaks again to how it is that these men saw themselves as belonging to the U.S. nation in a time that was not far removed from when Native peoples lived more distinctly, when Oklahoma was not a state and it was constituted by 39 some odd different tribes and their own political organizations. Again, this moment speaks to political forgiveness. Certainly, and especially if we listen to these Native soldiers' voices, service motivates them, a spirit of sacrifice motivates them. I think they embody an incredible resilience. For those of you who have known these veterans, you know what I'm talking about. These people were hard as nails, and I just admire them. And so I look forward to trying to celebrate them. And two, their comments over and over again emphasize their preparation. We ask them, "How did you do these things? How did you pull this stuff off?" And they would say, we were well trained. And particularly the 45th was well trained. They spent, golly, what, 2.5 years, some odd, getting ready to head off for their first deployment. They headed off from places like Chilocco, the boarding school in the northern part of Oklahoma. This was a kind of a militarily run academy. This is what it looks like today in the wintertime. And this is what it looked like in the postcards back at the turn of the 20th century. So this was a place that was modeled a little bit on boarding schools like Carlisle that were run up in Pennsylvania by military figures like Harvey Pratt. You can see there's some regimentation to the way that things are organized. They're in uniforms. Everything is neat and straight. Hair is cut. This didn't stop Native folks from getting to know each other in a variety of ways. So Chilocco and other boarding schools oftentimes were a place where intertribally natives came together and forged bonds that helped to shape a new kind of native experience in Oklahoma that was not always immediately bound to tribal affiliations. It was a place where people learned vocational skills. It was a place where, especially where Native men learned farming and ranching. They did a lot of mule driving. This prepared them well for the mountains in Venafro. They learned at a time when they probably should have been learning how to run a tractor, how to plow behind mule teams. But I think this is just a really marvelous photo from the National Archives, and I especially admire the beaded top hat that this guy is sporting as he's running this, 3-4 team plow. Chilocco was a place where Indianness still mattered in important ways. It was not the absolute goal of the institution to drive all vestiges of Indianness out of the attendees. So, for instance, when they put on shows, they would put on shows that had native themes. You'll notice that early on, Chilocco, along with its athletic program, shared the same logo that the 45th would have. But it too did not survive the outbreak of World War II. But at Chilocco, they also had ROTC programs. So sorry, this is a little fuzzy. This comes out of a 1939 ballpark, 1938 yearbook from Chilocco. So you can see the ROTC programs here. Um, they were getting ready very early on. And this was something that a number of folks participated in particular, the two fellows that I'm going to be talking about. Another place where a lot of these 45th folks went to study was Bacone Indian College. This is in Muskogee, Oklahoma, in the eastern side of the state, about where the Cherokee Nation and the Muskogee Creek Nation come together. So at Chilocco, we get a full company of the 45th in Company C. At Bacone, we get a full company in Company I. Both places were very intertribal. Bacone was not as regimental as Chilocco was. This was an institution of higher education run by Baptist organizations. And we see here a memorial dedicated to Company I today. Bacone, unfortunately, is no longer in operation. Some fiscal mismanagement led it to shut its doors just in the past 2 or 3 years ago. But they were big into athletics and they did a lot of whipping up on anyone who played them. This is their football team from some years before the war. This is a shot of Company I that came up out of Bacone. I keep talking about the two guys that I'm going to be profiling. One of them is Ernest Childers. He's a Muskogee Creek guy. He was from Company C. The other fella is Jack Montgomery, and we see him here, the farthest to the right in the middle. And as it turns out, both men attended both Chilocco and Bacone, but Bacone drew Montgomery's allegiance. Another famous figure coming out of the 45th was Bill Mauldin, and we see in some of his early work before they head overseas the native influence that he's sort of drawing on with the fantastic portrayal here at the bottom, especially. They've been falling in like that every morning since war was declared. It was clear, I think, to Mauldin and everyone else that the natives in the 45th were ready to get on the boat just as soon as they got the word. This guy you may have come across before. So this is Joe of Willie and Joe before Willie and Joe switch places. So Joe's original name was Private Joe Barefoot in the cartoons, but as time went on, he sort of had them swap their characteristics, and he stripped away some of the Indianness from Joe as he went along. So Mauldin comes to us from New Mexico. He was Hispanic. His first strips were the Star Spangled Banner in the 45th Division News. That was printed throughout the 45th's time, from when they were activated to when they were demobilized. You can find a biography of his, and up front, that is the name of both his strip when he was writing for Stars and Stripes, and a biography of his that was published later. So won the Pulitzer two times, this fella, 1945 for this amazing comic, To the Side. Fresh-spirited American troops flushed with victory are bringing in thousands of hungry, ragged, battle-weary prisoners. And it's hard to tell who's who, of course, in the shot. And then later years, he picked up another Pulitzer for a cartoon about an incarcerated Russian novelist. So he was adopted, come to find out, and it wasn't until much, much later in his life that he was to learn that I think it was his father. Someone can correct me if you know this, and I don't. Turned out to be Apache, but he didn't know that until quite a bit later on. So the nativeness of the 45th became a selling point in a variety of ways. It became a PR tool. Here, this is Dave Cummings of Muskogee Creek, who was photographed at Fort Devens, Fort Devers. I forget the name of this, and it's covered up for me. So this is in Massachusetts as they're getting ready to head overseas. in 43. Oh, there we go. The 45th found itself organized in a couple of different places, kind of geographically, coming out of pre-existing National Guard units. One of those, for instance, was Company K, which was made up largely of Choctaw and likely quite a few Chickasaw soldiers. Um, they found themselves getting a couple of presidential citations and a good deal of notoriety. And I imagine a mean bunch of motor scooters. Here they're on the Louisiana maneuvers in 1941. The again, nativeness got sold in a variety of ways as we're sort of getting ready to ramp up major European operations. Parade magazine did a pretty fantastic photo shoot of them before they got underway. And so they took some really spectacular photographs. We don't have, near as I can tell, a great deal that clearly specifies Native soldiers in the archives once we make it overseas. You know, the Signal Corps was frequently attached, but they didn't have a whole lot of time to find out who was who as they were putting these things together. So sometimes I'm doing a little bit of guessing when I'm looking at some of these pictures to see if these folks are native or not. But this early shoot, it's pretty clear that they very much are. And here we've got a kind of a blessing ceremony, staged, of course, to prepare this soldier for embarkation. Here are a couple of names that you have heard of before. This is a shot of Brahmat Echo Hawk. And the caption, I think, has us misidentified. Dave, I believe that's him on the right. What do you think? Are you still with us?
Yeah, it's him on the right.
Yeah, it's got to be right. The fellow to his left is named Sergeant Sleeping Rain. He's Potawatomi. Echo Hawk here is Pawnee. The Thunderbirds would show up in a couple of different post-war places. This is a 1952 film directed by a fellow named John Auer. It's terrible, but it's worth a watch just to sort of see what, you know, the strict B-roll films looked like, or you know, the second feature. This did have some important names in it. John Derrick, Bo Derrick's dad, and John Barrymore show up in this one. They do a little bit of Indian speak in this one, where this purportedly Osage fella offers a blessing on one of the natives who's going to go abroad. Um, and, you know, of course, he comports himself wonderfully and brings honor on the tribe and everyone else. But for the most part, the Indianness does not matter to this film. We've got a little dash of it at the very beginning, and then nothing really more is said along the way. More recently, there is a Netflix series that some of you may have seen called The Liberator. And this is more or less a profile of Colonel Felix Sparks, who is with the 157th Regiment, which was the Colorado component in many ways of the 45th. So it didn't have quite as many natives as we would have found in the 180th or the 179th, but it had more than a few. And some of the stars in this kind of rotoscoped live action animation include Martin Sensemeyer, Tatanka Means, and Kiowa Gordon. But this is a nice kind of four-part introduction and action-y orientation to the campaigns of the 45th through Italy and beyond. Again, you know, the sort of PR purposes of the Army. We're not above a little stereotyping. This is not a fellow from the 45th. This is a quartermaster in the UK. But we can see here how it is that, you know, this was a different era in terms of the racial politics and the racial representations. Um, but at the same time, you know, the Native folks were not chumps. They were powerful voices in their own right. They were serving as officers, as we see here, and didn't do anything that they didn't want to do, I think, for the most part. And now they might have been assigned point more often than they might have picked for themselves. But they were proud to remind people that they were native. And if they had to be a little bit more obvious and legible about showing people that they were native for some of these photo ops, then I think that they were willing to do that. So the 45th carries on, as you know, initially through Sicily in 1943. Not sure that that guy's native, but he kind of looks it, so he's made the cut, at least for our purposes here. On through the Salerno landing that takes them up into the mountains of Vinafro. And here again, not sure that that guy's native, but I'm 90%. You know, he's just he's got that feel to me. But we see here from some of these National Archive shots some of the incredible mud that people were contending with when the Volturno flooded across that valley. On through the Anzio landings. Anyone know the fella here? Second from the right. I'll take that as a no. I didn't know him either. Thank God for captions. This is Hal Muldrow. He was a um, what was he? Field artillery commander at the time. He went on to become a brigadier general after the war, but he was a Choctaw and rose to some serious prominence throughout World War II and beyond. We got a street named for him here in Norman, where we are today. 45th went on to their 104th amphibious landing in southern France with Operation Dragoon, landing near Saint Maxime, working their way up north into the Vosges Mountains. And it was sort of on the backside of the Vosges Mountains where Van Barfoot, pictured here, who is a Mississippi Choctaw, was also awarded the Medal of Honor. So I'm not profiling Barfoot, despite the incredible story that he offers us, not least because even though he's native, he's coming from Mississippi. And you just got to draw a line around your film somewhere. And so that's where I've chosen to draw it. They continue on across the Rhine into Germany in 45. Here we have a fairly famous shot of them moving through Bentheim on their way up to Aschaffenburg, which is just a bit south of Frankfurt. And then across to Nuremberg and down to Munich, liberating Dachau along the way. So, if you're looking for more reading, specifically on the 45th, I've got a few suggestions along the way. Again, some of them really fantastic, some of them short, some of them a little hit or miss, but all of them full of some incredible stories. So we've got that recorded, so you can go back and pause that at your leisure. All right, so the dudes that I'm profiling are a couple of amazing guys. We'll start with First Lieutenant Ernest Childers, Muskogee Creek and Cherokee. Although the Cherokee kind of fell off, but he claimed it back during World War II. These are some pictures from that parade spread. So they fortunately got him. He was a handsome, photogenic guy before he ever got shipped overseas. Grew up in Broken Arrow. That's again sort of where the Cherokee and Creek nations meet in eastern Oklahoma. He earned a battlefield commission um, linked to his leadership when his platoon leader was killed in Sicily, as they were just not long after the landing down south, as they were taking the Biscari airport. So that comes through after they make it to the mainland. Um, the actions for him occur at Oliveto Chitra. They were depicted as seen by Brahmat Echo Hawk. Even though the two were in different divisions, things got a little hairy not long after they got into this scenario. Childers had been wounded. He had broken his instep and he was at an aid station. And the aid station was coming under fire. And so he felt like he would be better off crawling through the cornfields than he would be sitting in place. And so he took off and he assembled a platoon or a squad of other folks who were hanging around there. And apparently, at least among those hanging around was Brahmat Echohawk, who swore that he saw this action with his own eyes. And so depicted it in a couple of different places. So once they start coming under fire, Childers is taking refuge behind a rock wall, crawling most of the way through these cornfields. And here we have some of the operational map, which is difficult for me to make sense of. But those of you with a better military mind than I'm sure can sort out what's happening there. So this is the spot where his actions took place as he eventually manages to take out two machine gun nests, a couple of snipers, and capture a mortar observer. So this is, as Dave reminds us, the Collina degli Eroi, the Hill of Heroes. And we were just sort of driving around. So Dave has the advantage of wonderfully fluent Italian. I can order food and say I want a lawyer, and that's about the extent of it. So as we were driving around in the area here around Oliveto Citra, we just so I happened in the far distance to notice what looks like an aqueduct, which is referenced in the regimental history. So we tracked that down, and as we were just noodling around, we noticed that there was an American flag flying at the top of this hill, and we thought that's peculiar. So we walked up and discovered that there was a plaque there that commemorated the actions of the 45th that day. So a big part of what I want to do in this film is show people what this country looks like. As I was growing up and read anything about the 45th or others, I never had a clear sense of what it was that they were facing. And so I'd like to try to show people what this landscape looks like, um, at least in the modern era, if we don't have archival footage to do it. So the one of the really amazing moments about Childers' story comes from when he ran out of grenades at the second machine gun nest. And so as he's taking cover, he finds a rock that's the approximate size and shape of a hand grenade, and he lobs it at the machine gun nest, and it falls a little short, but he tries it again. And the second one manages to get into the machine gun nest, and the soldiers that are manning it pop up thinking that they need to get out of here forthwith. And as soon as they pop up, Childers, who is trained in hunting, feeding his family by going hunting with one shell, and if you miss, you don't eat, picks off the first German immediately, and then one of his fellows who is with him, a fellow named Truax, if I remember right, kills the second one, and then they're able to get their squad out of this sticky situation and move on. He was wounded eventually at the Battle of Anzio, and was kind of bouncing back and forth between the hospital in Naples and Anzio. And he was down at the hospital when he learned that he was going to be medaled. He didn't learn until after he got the medal and had to ask a friend, what is it? That it was our nation's highest honor. So once he was medaled there, he was sent home, but he stayed in the Army until he retired much, much later as a lieutenant colonel. The next guy is First Lieutenant Jack Montgomery, a Cherokee. He was born in Long, Oklahoma, which is on the far east side of the state, not far from the Arkansas line. It's not terribly far from Short, Oklahoma, if you're looking for a little bit of playfulness in the geographies. So again, he comes out of both Chilocco and Bacone. This is a shot of him in later years when he was in Korea. So once you've earned or been awarded the Medal of Honor, you're not supposed to see active duty. But even though he retired from the military after World War II, Montgomery insisted on getting back in. He pulled every string that he could find with senators, et cetera, to get sent over to Korea. So he too was awarded a battlefield commission after Sicily, also from actions around Biscari. But the commission also makes mention of his leadership of his squad up on the North Shore. They were fighting along that North Coastal Road and hitting a lot of trouble around San Stefano and Castle Buono. So I wonder if perhaps that's part of the battle that they have in mind there too. This is an area near Ponte Landolfo, north of Oliveto Citra, as you're kind of working your way up towards Venafro in the boot there. And this is the site, near as I can figure it, where Montgomery's actions earned him the Silver Star. So at this roadblock, and of course, this is a much, much more modern road that we're looking at here. It's practically an interstate. But in the vicinity, um, Montgomery and his squad held this roadblock for about 30 minutes, despite being surrounded on three sides by Germans, including about 150 riflemen, four or more machine gun collections or crews, about three or four mortars, and one self-propelled artillery unit, and two tanks. Um, so it was a big deal. It sounds like under most circumstances that would have been enough for a medal of honor too. Um, by the account in the regimental history, Montgomery manages eventually, once he gets to the word, to get first one squad evacuated, then the second squad. He continues to hold off the Germans. So they think there are a lot more people there than there were, and they say that Montgomery is the last one off of the scene. So I went looking for some documentation on the Medal of Honor actions at the National Archives. Most of my time was spent collecting archival film, the rest of my time archival photographs, and then I got a chance to leaf through the case files, which was a little bit like looking through a haystack for a needle. They were just not particularly well organized. But I got really lucky, and on my last day of my first trip at the archives, I came across some of this documentation. So it may not be super riveting visually to anyone but me, but I find it really fascinating to get these firsthand accounts of the actions from eyewitnesses who were there, and then these maps, excuse me, showing us what it was that they were facing. So in Montgomery's case, what he's facing is sorry, give me 1 second, and I'm looking for. Well, no. Hmm. Yeah, okay, there we go. What we're looking at in his case is late February, February 22nd. His group, which was on the Paglione front, just north of Nettuno, had been there and just managed to fight off one of the most vicious counterattacks that the Germans staged. And they thought that they had it handled. They managed to finally get to sleep. I don't know, maybe what, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And Montgomery says he wakes up about 5 o'clock, so on next to no sleep at all, and discovers that the Germans have gotten within about 50 yards of where they were. And in his account, he says he felt like it was his responsibility that they had been allowed to get there. And so he saw it as his responsibility to help move them out. And so before dawn hits, he grabs a M1 and some hand grenades and he rushes 50 yards to one machine gun nest to take it out, another 50 to the next machine gun nest to take it out, and then another 200 to the next machine gun nest to take it out. Um, Along the way, then, in some, he winds up with about no less than 11 dead German soldiers, 32 taken prisoner, and I think they probably also managed to get a mortar observer out of the house that he entered too. It's just kind of mind-boggling to me how it is that physically one could do this. I can barely get up my stairs without running out of breath. I don't, I can't wrap my head around how it is that one man with one rifle can take 32 soldiers hostage. It's just kind of incredible. So that kind of heroism, I think, is just worth our telling people about. This portrait here too was done by Brahma Echo Hawk. And here we have a shot of him being awarded the Medal of Honor by Roosevelt in the White House. So that day, the day of his actions, I guess I should say that evening, an adjacent company to his had run out of ammunition, and he was running supplies back and forth to them when he got hit by a mortar shell that pretty severely injured him. He was in hospital for a good long while before finally being shipped back home. So he manages to stay out of trouble for 5, 6, 7 years, but then starts pulling strings again to get sent back to Korea. And here too, I can't remember if Dave showed us this picture of the mural that hung on the USS Anzio that Brahman Echo Hawk did. But we see him working from some, I imagine, firsthand experience of the amphibious landing, the attack on the bowling alley and the factory, shelling, of course, in the port. And this, I imagine, is known to many of you as Anzio Annie. He also took pains to show the nurses who served, and then finally the breakout and the liberation of Rome, working from a pretty famous photograph here. Okay, and let's see. I knocked up a little bit of a trailer that I could show you, but it doesn't give you a great deal more than what I've offered. And furthermore, its audio is a little rugged. So I don't know that anyone will feel like they've lost anything by my not showing you this trailer that I cut, I don't know, some 5 years ago. So part of the problem here is that I am working on this more or less on my own. My wife and I traveled to Europe, I guess, what, 2.5 years ago? And we were there for a year, and we were following the path of the Thunderbirds as we went to get footage of these places during the season that they were there. And so I've been stitching all this together using archival footage, again, that we got from the National Archives paired with the contemporary footage to, again, emphasize the landscapes that we're looking at to help us understand how it is that places can become sacralized by the histories and the stories that went on there. I'm going to try again to reward a little bit of the historian's detective sense by showing us some of these archival historical photographs and manuscripts. Try to supplement this with native art, especially done by veterans like Echo Hawk, others like O.T. Autry, who was Chickasaw, if memory serves. And we've got a couple of others here and there. I'm going to try to approach the audio of this film much like Peter Jackson did in the documentary They Shall Not Grow Old, which some of you may have seen about World War One, that draws almost entirely on archival interviews with veterans. So I'm going to privilege native voices in the telling of their stories. Some of this I may just need to supplement with a little bit of narration here and there so we're oriented in time and place, especially contemporarily. Soundtrack wise, again, we've got some amazing archival songs that we can draw on. A lot of tribes have individual songs that belong to the 45th Infantry. And we've got some recordings of those that we can, I think, use. We'll check with them to make sure that falls in accordance with their protocols. Um, that's about the large and small of it. The backside kind of question here is an important one for me. So one thing that I have not done is myself try to interview any surviving veterans, and I don't intend to. Not because I wouldn't value their perspective, but because I feel like it would require more support than I am in a position to provide. So I don't want to be drawing up stories that I can't help these men to process. So I'm going on existing resources, but I'm also taking pains to share these resources wherever I can. So whenever I've been working with other museums, especially our friends at the Winterline in Venafro or the 45th Infantry or now the Oklahoma National Guard Museum here in Oklahoma City. I've tried to give them everything that I've gotten. A lot of this National Archive stuff is public access, and even though we spend a lot of time digitizing this, it doesn't belong to me, and I want to try to share it with as many people as I can. I'm not sharing everything all the time. Some people have been, working on smaller kinds of projects, and I'm happy to give them some things. But I won't give them every card I've got up my sleeve just yet. Once I manage to get this film cut and out into the world, then I'll be happy to return and give them every shot that I digitized. That brings me to the end of the slideshow. I am happy to answer any questions that you might have or just let you all visit amongst yourselves, and I'll slink off into the corner.